In an earlier video, I explored India-themed Pokémon. In this, let's take that one step further with India-inspired regional variants. I've always had conflicting feelings about regional variants. On one hand, they're amazing because they're arguably the most creative aspect of world building in the Pokémon games in years, but on the other hand, it wasn't Game Freak's idea. See, regional variants, although introduced in Sun and Moon, were a meme of sorts in the Pokémon fan art community for a number of years before those games. They were called subspecies by the fans, and it was turning into a pretty popular trend. Now, I don't blame Game Freak for appropriating the idea. It is their IP after all, and they have been creatively bankrupt post Generation 5. Plus, it gives them an excuse to rehash old fan favorites without being accused of laziness. Fans love regional variants, and it's convenient for Game Freak. Everyone wins. So how is this relevant to this video? I suppose it isn't. I just wanted an excuse to remind viewers about the origin of regional variants, which I feel should be common knowledge. Game Freak gets way too much credit for them. Anyway, that's enough saltiness. Let's get on with the designs. We're starting off with Galvantula. First introduced in Generation 5, this Pokemon and its basic form Joltik quickly became a fan favorite. I picked this one because of the Gooty Tarantula, or Gooty Sapphire Ornamental, an exotic looking species of tarantula found only in a small part of Andhra Pradesh, India. Its color pattern was an almost exact version of Galvantula, and the obvious parallels inspired me to make this variant. Now, apart from the appealing design and abilities, one of the reasons for Galvantula's popularity is its unique typing, Bug and Electric. I wanted the Indian variant to have a dual type that was just as unconventional. The Gooty Tarantula is on the verge of extinction. That's where the Gooty Tarantula's unique properties come as an inspiration. It's found only in a small part of a single state in a single country. It has almost completely disappeared from this world, so a ghost secondary typing seemed appropriate. I replaced Galvantula's regular pattern on the back with a creepy looking face, which I like to think it uses to disorient predators. I made its legs a little bushier to distinguish it from its electric original, as well as to resemble its real-world inspiration a little bit more. Aside from the blue-yellow color inversion, I also added white since the Gooty Tarantula has a bit of that too, and it did fit the ghost typing really well, especially when added to the bushy portion at the back. I also made the eyes look a little more glazed without dark pupils, just to drive home the creep factor a little more. I'm quite happy with how this one turned out. For the second one, I picked Gogoat. This was a Generation 6 mascot used extensively in promotional material for the X and Y games and is synonymous with the Kalos region. But that being said, it has a very, for lack of a better word, template-y form, one that's ripe for exploration and tweaking. It also helps that Gogoats are incredibly common all over the world, but I wanted to get a little more specific for the Indian variant, so I picked the Himalayan Tar as the inspiration. I'm assuming that's a correct pronunciation? Let me check.
Himalayan tar.
Yes. Anyway, the Himalayan tar is found in, as the name suggests, the Himalayas. It's a rare creature that's evolved to have a thick layer of fur to survive the harsh cold of the region, so that had to be the most distinctive feature of this Gogoat variant. I wanted to exaggerate the mane-like appearance at the front and reduce the length of the horns a lot, since these Gogoats are wild ones that haven't been selectively bred to be optimally ridden by humans. The colors of the head are a bit darker, the fur is a more sober greyish brown. I changed the red eyes and hooves to blue so it suited the environment more, while also acting as a polar opposite to the original. These Gogoats are taller from all the constant jumping from one rock to another, and their hooves are also closer together since they constantly have to balance themselves on precarious surfaces while traveling in the mountains. This one's a far more rugged variant of the relatively domesticated Kalos one. Now we move on to the Pokemon in the thumbnail, the one you've been presumably waiting for. Oricorio. I'm gonna be frank here, I generally hate Pokemon that look way too humanoid or look like the entire gimmick is based on man-made items or motifs, but Oricorio is a rare exception. Mostly because I always like when the Pokemon designers make one that has alternate forms, Burmy, Deerling and so on. It gives an added layer of depth to them and makes it look like the creators really gave some thought into how these Pokemon fit into the environment around them. So although the different variants of Oricorio are all based on dance styles, they still look naturalistic enough. And plenty of birds IRL already look rather extravagant and are known for their meticulous dances to attract mates. So in this case, the dance style inspiration checks out perfectly. For the Indian Oricorio, there can be no dance style that fits better than Kathakali, widely known for the colorful ornamental appearance of its dancers and the intimidating presence. This Oricorio had to look a little more distinct from its more minimalistic Alolan cousins. The color palette of the Kathakali dancer is just perfect, I couldn't tamper with that. White, red, yellow and a bit of green, that's really all I needed. Obviously I can't add too many bits and bobs, it still needs to fit within the visual language of the other Pokemon designs, but its feathers do have a lot more flair to them, especially in the head area. I wanted to create the wide, imposing stance of the Kathakali dancer, and I think it comes through well enough, while still retaining the cuteness of Oricorio's base design. Let's move on to the next Pokemon that gets a regional variant, Milltank. This is a spicy one. If you have some idea of how cows are viewed in India, you already know where I'm taking this. But before I go ahead, let me say first that I really dislike Milltank's design. Its general form is fine, I just can't put my finger on why I don't like it. Maybe it's the color palette, the goofy expression, I don't know. Anyway, it's a Pokemon first introduced in Generation 2 and made iconic with the battle against Whitney in the Johto games. Obviously, my version was going to be based on the Indian cow, considered a holy animal in many parts of India and worthy of worship. I want to reflect that in this region's Milltank as well, so I made it a psychic type to build on its mystical and divine associations. Like its real-life inspiration, Milltank are also revered by many people in this Indian equivalent region and are always seen with flower garlands around their necks that have been put on by the locals. Like I said earlier, I'm not a fan of the original Milltank's design, so I changed the eyes a bit to give it a more serene yet sober expression since it is a psychic type with a high social status. I already used a third eye in a Pokemon from my previous video and I do want to avoid cliches, but in Milltank's case, the base design already had a space in its forehead that resembled a third eye, so it seemed like too perfect an opportunity to pass up. Since this Milltank is a bit more aggressive, I gave it longer and sharper horns. I changed the shape of its tail and I also removed the glove-like appearance of its upper hooves. For the colors, I kept it as a plain white to really nail in the holy cow archetype and made its horns and hooves purple to give a physical hint of its psychic typing. Finally, I turned the stomach a dull blue because it went well with the white and I much prefer a single color over the weird yellow stomach with pink udders of the original. Overall, not my best regional variant, but I still rather have this on my team than the regular one. Let's move on to a Generation 1 classic. I always associated this one with incompetence because of its role in the anime, and I wasn't too fond of the general design, but I did like one aspect of it, the pattern on its belly. The early Pokédex entry stated that their pattern shifted from region to region, a fact that has never been represented in the games beyond Generation 2. I also like how the pattern resembles a menacing looking face, so I wanted to build on that. The Indian Arbok isn't just a poison type, but also has a secondary ground typing. I changed the face design a bit, giving its mouth a different form, adding that tube-like thing that real cobras have in their mouths, and changing the eyes from the classic Sugimori style white triangle to a more evil looking one with a dark circle for that added intimidation factor. I made the pattern across its length a little more complex since this design isn't limited by the need to be clearly visible on an 8-bit Game Boy screen. But for the most important aspect, the belly pattern, I try to use shapes and motifs that are far more ornamental than the original. Lots of curves and rounded forms, trying to make it look like a simplified rangoli or any other design pattern that represents a generic design one thinks of when you say Indian pattern. I kept a bit of purple and green to give a hint of the poison typing and kept the overall color an ochre yellow so it can camouflage itself well enough, sticking close to the ground with its belly pattern hidden before it strikes. And finally, I decided to make a variant on a legendary Pokemon. This has been a thing since Generation 8 Sword and Shield, so it's a very recent development, but it showed us that legendaries are not only multiple but have had regional variants as well. Personally, I quite like the revised design of the bird trio, particularly Moltres, which actually looks better than the original. Anyway, I wanted to explore a different legendary bird, Generation 2's Ho-Oh. Now the original concept is based on the Chinese mythical bird Feng Wang. Based on the Chinese mythical bird Feng Wang, specifically the one in the Golden Temple in Kyoto, Japan. It's a very exotic looking bird with a slender frame, long neck, and extravagant plumage for its tail feathers. If compared to Indian birds, I'd say it represents the peacock really quite closely. A bird that's equally extravagant in feather layout and color. My Ho-Oh variant was going to be based on the peacock. It's the national bird of India, and more importantly, it's a recurring element in Indian mythology. This Ho-Oh doesn't have as wide a wingspan since it isn't in the air as often, but it does have a lot more feathers on its tail, giving it a huge fan-like form with more distinct circular-looking formations within it resembling eyes. For the color palette, I didn't just want to take Ho-Oh and do a peacock colored palette swap, so I also referred to the peacock pheasant and made its neck, beak and feet black. I did use blue shades across his body though. This Ho-Oh is a water type, which seemed like a sensible choice given that the original orange Ho-Oh was a fire type. And there you have it, my 6 Indian regional variants. Did you like any of them? Did you dislike any? Let me know in the comments. I'm curious about what you think and always looking for feedback. If you're interested in more similar content in the future, do check out my other video on this subject, and more importantly, please subscribe to this channel.